So here we are back at the Viking camp. I'm using the overdub on the microphone because I got a new camera and a microphone, and it works great except that I had the autofocus on the entire time. Hello, there's my handy helper holding the camera today. Yeah, so we had to use the autofocus by accident, and it made too much noise. The automated motor was just going zoom, zoom, zoom the whole time, and it ruined most of the soundtrack from the video. So I'm going to overdub this with audio. So here's, I got my, today we're going to be making Birken, Pech, or Birch Tree Tar, which is a kind of a medieval super glue, which actually was around way before medieval times, but it's kind of really useful for everything that about that time is historically correct. And went and got myself some ceramic pots from the Home Depot. Got me one to catch the beech tree tar in. Of course, it looks handmade, of course. Yeah, well, you just got to imagine that I made that by hand. Yeah, we're going to put that down in the fire, hoping that the beech tree tar is going to condense from this pot down through this hole and into the pot. Now here I have all my beech tree, my Birkenrinde, my beech tree bark, and I'm going to place that in there and seal this lid on top there with this special sealant that I had to purchase, since this was kind of a do-it-now project. Instead of patiently gather up all the supplies, I had to compensate with this aftermarket sealant rather than use clay, which would have been more kind of a historical component. However, I wanted to get this done so I could start making my arrowheads for my Viking bow, so I could shoot some arrows that match the time frame of the Viking bow I'm building. So here's the fire pit. I removed the fire pan, so now I can be doing some more projects such as this. And now the fire pit is actually a little bit more historical for aesthetic reasons. Also, it matches. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking the sealant that I bought at the hardware store. Since I couldn't find clay at short notice, which would have been the preferred method of sealing this lid on, I'm using this special cement that is for fireplaces, which will work just as well. Yeah, and every time I go to this hardware store, people kind of look at me strange. There's a combination of things that I always buy, and they ask me what I'm doing with them, and when I tell them, they think I'm crazy, so I just don't tell them anymore. So what I do is I go and I ask for something that will stand fire, and that's what they gave me. So I'm putting that on the lid now to seal it up as best as I can. I'm going to put a nice rim of it around there. Unfortunately, since this is a new camera and microphone setup I have no experience with, I'm using this for the first time. This is my new camera. The picture is quite adequate, and the sound too, but unfortunately I did not know that the autofocus was on the entire time I was filming, and the motorized function of the lens has been making most of my video just unbearable to watch. So I'm going to be dubbing most of this over the microphone so you guys can actually enjoy the video and some halfway decent explanation of what I'm doing there. The method I'm using here is hopefully going to produce a substance called Birken Pech, or beech tree tar, and as you see, it's a very messy process. I have to apply a lot of this material into this pot, hoping it will work. This is an experiment, and as you will see later, experiments always come with a learning experience. So yes, this actually dates back, the substance that I'm making or trying to make here in this pot actually dates back way back to where before the Stone Age. This Ötzi the Iceman, the frozen man out of the ice that they found, actually had this with him also. So this is a very old substance that it's been around a very long time. That mankind's been using it to glue materials together and make tools and repairs, and they've even used it in medieval times to use it as teeth fillings, and there's an endless amount of uses that you can get out of this. So just stay tuned and see what happens here. It's pretty, it's quite an interesting entourage here, this project. So here I'm putting on the lid, and as you see, it's not an easy task. I've got to put it on perfectly straight and without any of the birch tree bark in the seal, or it will not seal airtight, which would cause all of the birch tree bark there inside that to burn instead of to smoke slowly and force the smoke down into the bottom of the pot and to condense into the tar that we're trying to make. So I'm pushing this on really firmly with the sealant, hoping it would seal the way I've planned. Now I'm going to take my hand. I'm wearing special gloves that are kind of resistant to chemicals and moisture, so I'm making sure I seal the side of this up really well so that this project goes as planned. So the next step would be to take the catch containment, the actual container that I am planning on catching the birch tree tar into the fire, and setting the birch tree tar container on top, hoping that the hole in the bottom will be enough to allow the tar smoke to collect in that container there that I am now burying in the fire pit. And I got dirt in there which would contaminate it, so I had to clean it back out, and allow the smoke to collect in there and condense into tar. So that's our goal. So I am now placing the container into the fire pit on top of that, and I'm going to bury it so that I can make a fire on top. So I'm very careful that I'm not getting any dirt in there, and I'm going to make sure it's all sealed up and everything looks good. I'm checking the hole at the bottom to make sure that it's still free of obstructions, and I'm going to place it in there very carefully so that it's level as possible, and make sure everything is up to specs and expectations, and earth it in, and we're gonna start a fire here on it next. So what I'm doing here in this scene is I'm taking the axe and I'm very carefully scraping off the birch tree bark into powder. That is a very effective ignition source for fire, so it helps get the fire started. Everything is soaking wet today. It's going to be really tough, so I'm excited to see how this is going to work out. I'm using the axe very gently, not to cut through the bark, but just to scrape off the white substance that's on the outside into a powder. And then I'm putting it in the middle, and I'm getting as much as possible collected, so the effectiveness of this method is as high as possible. Here I'm taking the axe and I'm taking my piece of Kienspan that I've collected, and I'm very carefully scraping off some curls of this Kienspan onto my fire and my dry grass that I was able to score some dry grass out of my fire starting basket, which I was very lucky. I just had that very little bit there left from last time. So we're taking some of this Kienspan, of this fat wood, and we're putting it on top of there to increase the burn time and the effectiveness of our starting fire. So that's what I'm doing right there, and I'm getting ready here to get the ignition source ready. So here I'm using a flint and steel. Actually, it's a magnesium fire starter. It's not a flint, but it's using a spark to ignite tinders. So I like using this method because it's as close to flint and steel as you can get. It's really hard to get flint around here, which I'm going to try to find a good source and make a nice video about that too. That'll be a day for the summertime weather. It's kind of wet and nasty outside, so it's going to be something for future videos. Here I'm making this, I call this a fireboat, a Feuerschiffchen. We call that when we make our grill fires. We laugh about it because it's like a little tiny Viking ship that's on fire for sacrifice. So this is kind of a little joke we have. And here we are piling up these fire starting sticks that I've made. Chop these all up into little kindling, that's what the word is. And I'm placing this on top to start the fire, actually on top of the pot, so that we can get the heat inside to raise the temperature. And hopefully we'll have a really good outcome here in a little bit, so let's see what happens. So here I'm chopping up the rest of my Viking chair, and Prince is paying attention to every detail. As always, he's making sure that everything goes well. And here I think he just saw a piece of paper fall off the table, which he's really interested in. Here, it's actually this piece of my one of my Viking chairs that exploded apart after sitting on it. Yeah, I guess it was time to get rid of it. It fell apart, so I'm actually here recycling it, and I'm making it useful into another project. The Vikings were actually very good at recycling, since they didn't have a lot of resources. So they had to use everything to its maximum extent. So if like a bow and arrow was broken down and it was no longer useful, it was worn out, they'd make spoons or other small utensils out of it. And so here I am chopping up my Viking chair to make birch tree tar. To eventually we're gonna make arrowheads for attachments with this birch tree tar. So we're actually recycling this chair for a good cause, so it's pretty cool. It's pretty Viking here, so recycling. They were pretty good at it. There's Prince, hard at work. Yep. So, next step is going to be waiting for this fire to sizzle down, and then we'll see what goes on. So, here we are in the rain. It started to rain absolutely just beyond relief, and it did not stop, so we decided to come under cover and clean out the Viking tent and get all the stuff out there and remodel the inside. So this is what it looked like under the tarp. The mice were doing a good job at making all kinds of tunnels in there. And stuff was getting moldy and nasty, and I threw out all the carpets and tarps and stuff like that I had in there. So I'm going to try to make a new floor in this Viking tent. And if you guys have any suggestions or possible ideas how I could do this to make this so that it doesn't get wet and that the mice don't make it nasty, I'm thinking of actually taking the floor and making a real wooden floor inside of this tent. It's kind of a permanent fixture for the next couple of years or so. It's going to be pretty easy to do that, but I need to make sure that that's going to be something that's not going to cause problems again after all the hard work. And here we see the fire burning away. It's been about an hour now, so we're about halfway into the process. The fire is still going, so we'll let that burn down, and then we'll pull it out of the fire and see what we have as a finished product, if this worked out the way we planned or not. Yeah, look at Prince. He's always so playful. Here he's trying to earn himself a treat by doing all his tricks at the same time. Prince is a genius. In this picture you see the blacksmith forge workshop coming out slowly but surely. We've used the opportunity to move some of the more valuable equipment under the tarp there. It's just an ongoing process, and I only have time to come up here very rarely in the last couple of months because of work and the house, and you know how life goes. Sometimes life is just busy and complicated, but it's coming along, and as soon as I get some helpers and some better weather, we're going to really expand that project into some successful working outcome so we can do some blacksmithing. So here I'm digging out the pot after the fire has been going for about 3 hours now. We let it burn through the hard rain. It kept going, so we kept putting wood on top of it so it wouldn't go out. Now we're at the point where we can take the ashes and move them out to the side and free the pot, the clay containers, and see what the result is. So YouTube, I was hoping to take that clay pot out of the fire, and so we had a little surprise. Yeah, it's empty. There's nothing in there. It's supposed to be full of tar. So, yeah, that didn't work out too well. So this clay pot actually broke in half, leaving me with only charred birch tar, which does me no good. So I guess the fire that we made was a little bit too hot, or the quality of the clay flower pot wasn't that great. So the sidewall of the pot actually broke and allowed for the smoke of the birch tar to escape out the top instead of be pushed down into the small cup and condense into tar. So that doesn't do me much good after we've been standing out in the rain all day. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and just dump this back in there, just like that, and just bury it back in there for the next fire we make and let that smolder out. It's been raining all day, everything's soaking wet, so it's perfectly safe to just leave it there. We did put it out with some more water after we left, and so we're just going to have to try this again. Yeah, so the problem that I discovered was most likely the failure was that the pot just got too hot. Next time, I think we'll use a metal can.